Did you know that there is a rule of lenity? It's one of the canons of statutory construction. So, for purposes of statutory construction, the courts and bill drafters often use a series of canons to guide them through interpretation problems. These canons include so called textual canons, which we refer to as intrinsic aids, as well as linguistic presumptions and grammatical conventions, substantive canons, and extrinsic aids. Now, it's nearly impossible to list all of them, but there are a few common canons that are most helpful or useful for legislative drafting and interpretation. We start with the presumption that the legislature drafts its bills carefully and intentionally. And because of this presumption, the usual approach of the judicial branch is to narrow statutes rather than expand them, and the courts are then less activist in their interpretation. We have a number of what we call tiebreaker canons that are used when there's a so called 50-50 split in the interpretation of a statute. One of the examples of a tiebreaker canon is what we call the rule of lenity, in which penal or criminal law statutes whose purpose is to punish offenders must be construed strictly or narrowly. And the purpose of this narrow interpretation is to provide adequate notice, due process, and fairness to the suspected criminal. It's usually not used in a way that decides the case, that all evidence is in the defendant's favor, plus the rule of lenity. Instead, it basically requires a strict construction of a criminal law or penal code statute. In this way, a court will apply any unclear or ambiguous law in a manner that is most favorable to the criminal defendant. So the rule of lenity is a canon used in the criminal law. It's sometimes called the rule of strict construction. And again, it basically states that an ambiguous criminal law statute is to be construed against the state.